hair all over its body other than the face itself.
There are, in fact, 4 different types of, what we think of as Sasquatch or Bigfoot.
Very wide, pronounced nose. There was also a very ominous odor.
Phase 1 is to identify opportunities. I walked into a small clearing in less than 10-15 feet away from this enormous creature, and it scared the living hell out of me. Phase 2 is conducting investigations both of witnesses and locations. The size of the thing, it was 4 or 5 feet across the shoulders. Phase 3 is profiling research areas, what's there, how they move, feeding, things like that. About 8 feet tall, I guessed around 800 pounds. It was massive. I had no idea that anything like that existed. Phase 4 is create an intercept plan. I decided to shoot in the air to see if maybe it would scare it off. Phase 5 is the intercept and resolve the issue phase. It didn't do anything, didn't react, and then I heard a noise from my right rear, and from out behind some brush come another one and walked over by the first one. That's when I decided to do what the dog did. I took off running. Welcome to Witness of the Unknown. Hello everyone, I'm speaking with Don today. How are you, my friend?
Very well. How are you doing, Will?
I'm good. Well, let's just go ahead. Usually I just have people start off by talking about whenever your first incident started, or what you were doing that day, or whatever, and I just leave it up to you.
I was probably in my early 20s. This would have been 1978, Will. And I was living in an city, Joliet, Illinois. It's about half hour from Chicago. And can you hear me? Am I coming in clear?
Yeah, you sound good.
And so I used to go to the various state parks and go camping. I had friends that were into, I started out like a lot of people in the area. Rurally, I did a lot of hunting, fishing, pheasant hunting, even deer hunting in Wisconsin, and went fishing a lot. And somehow it all morphed into fishing and camping with the guys I hung out with in high school. And then that changed as we got out of high school and we started just doing a lot more fishing and camping. So my first encounter, if you want to call it more of an experience, is in sort of west central Illinois. And I had been morel hunting in May, June of that year. We have morel season usually early in the year in Illinois, and it's sort of like a combination of Missouri and I want to say Missouri and Wisconsin climate. The forested hills where I live in my area, that's the area that I went mushroom hunting, morel hunting, and we went out early, and I came across what I want to call, at the time, I really didn't know how to describe it other than to say that initially I thought it was a buck deer crashing through a thicket toward me and my dog as we were walking through an area. I was looking for mushrooms, and it sort of surprised me, and I sort of held back behind this huge tree not to provoke it. It was past deer season. Deer weren't even in rut. This thing sort of holed up behind the tree, stopped immediately. We waited each other out for probably a good 35 to 45 seconds, both standing there. My dog did a 180, came back toward me after he gave it a muffled bark, and I stood there, and this thing finally, and I figured it would be a deer, but it shook the whole tree and actually knocked branches down to the ground when it crashed through this tree. And I never got a visual. All I got was a silhouette and this creature walking away. I'd say within a minute after I heard it, was total silence for, I'd say, 45 seconds. And it just sort of turned. I could hear it turn and release branches and just sort of walk away, just like another person, probably no bigger than me, maybe a little bigger than me. It was like a person was out there, and I never did. I sort of stored that away in my memory banks and never talked about it to anybody again until 25, 30 years later when I got married. But
did it ever acknowledge your presence in any way?
Other than when my dog actually went past the threshold of where it could have seen me. I was like 20 feet behind my dog. But my dog rushed ahead on a trail, and I had a Siberian German Shepherd mix, and she always stayed ahead of me. But she ran ahead, and this creature, like it was basically crashing through the brush toward my dog, and my dog just sort of let out a muffled bark, looked back at me, and then just sort of casually walked back to me as if to say, let's go a different direction. So then I just holed up for 45 seconds waiting for this thing to emerge, which it never did. Mm-hmm. And then after about, like I said, I know it was very close to a minute. I said, man, I was afraid to make a move. It was like we were playing a waiting game. And finally, this thing just slowly turned. I saw the branches from this tree sort of spring back to where it was. Mm-hmm. And this thing continue walking down toward this hill that, because where I was crossing was a little game trail that went on this ridge approaching this hill where this gigantic oak tree was. And the branches damn near touched the ground. And it sort of surprised me. I said, I don't remember a deer crashing through that thick of a ground cover. I've seen them do it. I've witnessed them going through weeds, but and I've surprised deer, but this was not a deer. It was something, I'd say it had definite footfalls, unlike a deer where you can sort of, a deer can walk through leaf-covered ground and you can't hear him.
Right.
This thing, I think, intentionally wanted to be heard almost, and it was, that was my first encounter here in Illinois. I haven't touched into my, I think in my email to you about my New Mexico encounter, which was a year later.
Yeah, very interesting. Obviously, it was aware of your presence.
Yeah, and it was sort of interesting in that area. This is 1978. I was in this area of west central Illinois, and there's a lot of state parks around here, and this was, I want to say, 12, 15 years before I got married to my first wife, who I'm currently still married to. Careful how I word that, but I went out on a date with a girl that was local to the area, which was about a mile and a half from where I had my experience in '79. This was in '78, and we were out there, and it pulled in this area by this. Best way I could describe it is we have rivers and these canals or waterways through probably 3/4 of Illinois, but this one particular canal. This girl, we pulled in, and I was turning around, and she goes, yeah, this is, she says, have you heard of the stories in this area of, we have like a wild man creature? And I remember asking her, I said, what is it called? And she goes, it's called Hairy Larry. And I said, well, so then years later, BFRO shows up in this area, and I guess, I don't know, my niece told me they did a recording here, and I thought, well, BFRO has recorded sighting spots probably going back 30 to 40 years just in my area, but nobody seems to resolve the fact that they're still ongoing. And I'm sort of the only guy sort of that I don't promote it, but I privately indulge in it because of my encounters in '78. So I go back to these local sites where I've had my personal encounters, nothing to do with BFRO, right. And I still see evidence of activity, I guess you'd call it.
It's pretty interesting. There was already a local kind of a history of activity there.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I didn't know until I checked the BFRO database, and I'm like, they basically have a chapter in every state. Mm-hmm. But the guy that's in charge of the Illinois chapter, and you probably know him, he's Stan Courtney. He's been around the 2 or 3 tri-state Midwest area doing all these his own audio. Well, I captured my own audio, I'd say comparable to what Stan Courtney did. And, of course, I don't have thousands of recordings, but mm-hmm. I still have, I guess you'd call it audio vocalizations. Yeah. And they're interesting. And it's sort of what spawned it is my encounter in '78, and then eventually in '79 in New Mexico, which is my next event. I'll touch into whenever.
Okay. Sure.
Whenever you're ready.
Yeah, it's up to you.
That was. Yeah, I mean, unless you have any questions, well, to flesh it out a little better, but.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I was. I had moved in '78. I was in my early 20s. I want to say I was 22, 23 when I had my encounter in '78, 24, excuse me. And I moved down to New Mexico because I procured a job working as basically a plumber, and ended up having my weekends off. And that allowed me to explore the area, continued my camping tradition I had in Illinois, camping and fishing. They had a lot of trout streams in the area of this area. It's no surprise to anybody, but it's sort of a green belt. It's west of Las Cruces, and it's in an area called the Black Range, Gila National Wilderness area, and that's where I worked in that vicinity, and I would go camping in this area on a weekend. While I decided to go down there in the Black Range Mountains in the southwest corner of New Mexico and camp in the basically the Black Range Mountains, and accomplished that with basically a backpack, and my camping dog at that time was Samoy. I no longer had the German Shepherd from Illinois, and we went up down from the mountains, probably good. As a crow flies, 7 miles down the mountain, but it was probably closer to, I want to say, 11, maybe 11 and a half, 12 miles, because you have to walk the ridge line in these mountains. You can't go straight down them. They're at a 65-degree grade, and I went camping there by myself with my dog in the base of one of these mountains on a weekend, and I ended up encountering I guess you'd call it a lot of noises and things I was unprepared for that evening. Mm-hmm. Starting at about 9:30, probably higher in altitude. You're above the mountains. I had parked in an area where these roads basically switch back, go through the top of the mountains, and I actually parked in a section which is probably part of the U.S. Forestry Service. It's a road for observation, but you can camp. It's not so controlled nowadays. You probably couldn't get back there, or you could. It'd be limited, though. I went down that 12-mile from where I was parked into Mountain Valley and set up camp down there, and found a fishing hole and had my fishing backpack, my fishing gear in my backpack, and I found these little isolated trout streams in these like mountain gorges where they're basically these cold pools that are 10 to 12 feet deep, sort of waterlocked in between these mountain gorges. And got lost the first day back there, and it took me an additional 3 to 4 hours to correct where I had hiked out of and find the creek that followed it back to my camp. And I was probably got back around 6:30, 7 o'clock, and it didn't get dark until 9:30 that p.m. And that's shortly thereafter darkness. 9:30 is when all the what I call strange, unfamiliar activity that now at 27, 28, I've been camping since I was 15, 14 years old. Our family come from a tradition of hunters and fishermen, but mostly hunters because of, I guess you'd call it, the military aspect. My dad was in the Air Force. My sister used to go hunting with me. She had her own shotgun. So we were sort of coming from I won't say a gun-based culture, but definitely it was, we lived in Illinois, but we might as well have lived in Canada.
Sure.
So that was my my episode that I had my backpack hung up in a tree when this happened at 9:30. Unfortunately, my handgun was in my backpack, and all I had was a sheath knife and a small campfire, my dog, and his fear to go out against whatever this thing was circling my camp till 4:30 that morning.
Good.
That was probably this one. I'd say now at 64, I'm a retired electrician. I would put that up there with the top, probably 1 out of 10 items. That would be the top item. I would still be terrified. It's almost like my hair. I could still feel it. Here it is, 30-something years later. I could still feel my hair sort of stand up on my arms from this encounter. And it was basically this creature circled me, and I come to the conclusion there was probably more than one, because it boldly walked across a creek bed within 65, 70 feet from where my base camp was, and just boldly walked into my camp under nightfall with non-existent moon, because the mountains were so high. The moon was up there. It was behind the mountain peaks. And it was dark as I could put my hand in front of my face, and I probably couldn't see it without the gradual light from my campfire. And this thing, like I said, it changed position. This went on. It was like a marathon of terror from 9:30 p.m. to 4:30. And I remember when I got back, and I worked weekends for a rancher, and he told me, he says, always take a person with you, if not, at least take your dog. And I says, I think next time, I told him my dog wasn't enough.
Right.
That the dog was more of it was a nice alarm to have with me. But having that gun up there, I don't really think the gun mattered, because I had a sheath knife, a buck, a 110 buck, which is, I thought, well, there were black bears up there, but generally black bears don't circle at night. There was no huffing or puffing. It was more of something that sounded like it was wheezing, like it had just really large lungs. And I was petrified, and still, at my age, I was glad that I had the ability to possibly run, but apparently my dog would probably not engage this thing. It was on my chain. I had it on a choke chain in my camp, and the choke chain was relaxed most of the time, because he wasn't like straining to get out to this creature.
Right.
And what triggered it off was, what gentleman is walking a good 12-mile walk on and off game trails from the parking lot down an altitude of over 7,400 feet to my base camp after sunset, and risk not just the mechanical injury, but actually walk into my camp. I actually whistled out to it, but I never once said, who goes there, or please identify. I was getting that close, but I thought, whoever this thing was, when it walked across the creek, it was like, here I am, and it just walked across the creek. And then when it was on the cliff across the creek, just viewing me when it first walked in, and I heard, it was like I could hear the riprap, or sandstone rock on the top of the cliff face being walked on. You could hear the crunching, and I was thinking, wow, this sounds like a bear or something. Like coyotes are silent in that kind of rubble, that you can't hear them.
Right.
And the same goes for this thing. Wanted to let me know, hey, I'm here. And guess what? And then I'd say not even 8 minutes later, that creek 60 feet away from me, where my campfire was built, and I was sitting there with my dog, something just starts to walk toward me. And I just had a few scrub oaks, junipers, and snake cactus, and some sequoia, some small century plants, as they call it. So this area in New Mexico is very similar to Southern California, where I was at. It's got that kind of, feel. But it was, unfortunately, 4:30 when it started. It was starting to get a little lighter out. This thing, it sort of fell back, and when it left, I didn't hear it at all. It sort of like snuck off.
Yeah,
and
you said you heard some vocals.
I heard heavy, like breathing. It was like, at first I thought, oh, it's got to be a bear, because that's where your mind goes. You want to say, oh, it's got to be black bear. And the only thing else is, there were Pole Herefords and cattle in the area. But I said, there's no way a Pole Hereford got down into this canyon, gorge valley from 7,000. Yeah, they're usually up crossing the road. So I was like, this is a big animal. And I thought it's a person. And I thought it was a big park ranger walking in with his gun, and I was waiting for him to say, hello, this is, what are you doing down here? I followed your trail in the middle of the night, which, first of all, would have been, unlikely, because I think they do, there was no rescue for me.
And you probably would have seen a flashlight, too, right?
I would have seen a flashlight. I would have heard voices. I heard none of that. I just heard the bipedal footsteps of something that was, several points where it was approaching me, didn't care. It just like walked in, like, here I am, you can hear me walking. And then when it would like change position, it's where I think the second individual was involved.
it would like be in front of me on my north, and then immediately I'd hear a noise to my south on the other side of my campground, and I'm thinking, I'm probably surrounded. There's two, could even be a third, but that wasn't until months later when I sort of kicked myself for not looking for footprints. But now I sort of I have that situational awareness I didn't have then. So that's part of the nuts and bolts of my encounter. My dog was emitting a deep-throated growl, just loud enough for me to hear, as if to say, just stay there and I'll stay here. My dog was like no indication he wanted to go after it. And it was a male Samoy, which they look like white Siberian Husky, basically, without the markings.
Yeah, it sounds like he was well aware of what was out there and not too willing to go beyond where he was.
Yeah, well, I sort of, as the night wore on, I started worrying out of firewood, and I couldn't go out at 2, 3 o'clock and gather more with this thing circling my camp. And I'm sure my dog probably would have disappeared, and I would have never seen him again. But the other thing was I didn't have that night vision like I do now. Then 79, sure there was military-grade night vision, but you'd have to go to an army surplus to buy it.
Not very good back in those days.
No, they were probably first generation. And the thing is I had binoculars that were starlight vision, but you had to have really starlight and moon, and
right.
I was in this valley gorge in the Black Range, just east of what I would refer to as Hillsborough, and then there's another small town called Black Range Station, and you go up in the Gila National Wilderness, and this is quite a distance before you get to the Gila Cliff Dwellings, but I went to that area. It's called, it's well known. To this day, they took the signage down, but there was a sign marking that area called the Kneeling Nun Monument. And I camped, I actually found out where that marker was, and I deployed myself and walked down the mountain to camp on the approach to Kneeling Nun, and I never decided to stay the second day to walk out and take pictures of it, because it's sort of a rock artifact due to erosion that looks like an actual person or woman kneeling down. So they call it the Kneeling Nun Monument, and it's in that part of southwestern New Mexico. So I was in my camping days, and I had a lot of, strangely enough, here I am 64, I had a lot of Native American friends and Latinos that I went camping with back then that knew the area better than me, and told some wild stories, but I don't know, I think I encountered whatever the heck they were talking about back then.
How did they talk about it? I mean...
Well, they made references on the weekends. I'd get together with some of my Native American Navajo friends when I lived in New Mexico, and I had a few Latino friends, the Theus brothers, and we'd hang out, and they'd talk about, hey, shouldn't be walking. We'd be out drinking beer at a point near basically U.S. Forest area on these small foothills, and they go, yeah, you don't want to be walking around here at night. And they made references not just to Bigfoot, they were talking about little people.
Sure.
And the little people were, they had names for them, all the various tribes. But this reminded me of an account I had in Illinois when I was, of course that's another show, but it was probably, I was 7, 8 years old. And it was an area I lived near in Chicago, which was, there was tribal influence in an area where I lived. And they did, they had a history of little people, and, you know, so me and my sister saw what, for the probably best explanation would be a 15-inch to 18-inch tall being with clothes, walking around our house until that house everybody moved out of it. So I don't know if it was haunted. All I know is I don't know paranormal, and I certainly don't engage in that in the Bigfoot world. I look at it, it's a
right. That's something different.
I guess different topics. Yeah, it's a different topic, and I know with you, I followed your research and work, and I've read about, you know, when I was in the 70s and 60s about Ivan T. Sanderson. I read his book, and a lot of other books by early researchers, and not really totally convinced, but it was always a question on my mind. They were, you know, Ivan T. Sanderson and Grover Krantz were talking about these creatures, and I always sort of thought, yeah, it just reminds me of one film, the Patterson-Gimlin film, but I never went any deeper than that.
Yeah. Did you have any experiences after? Oh, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Go ahead, Will. I'm listening.
I was just going to ask you what you, if you had experiences after the New Mexico night there.
Yeah, after the New Mexico, and I got a hold of my rancher and told him I didn't touch on that. I told him it was, I said I had heard a lot of creatures that night, and it was the following weekend I was working for the rancher in New Mexico, and he goes, yeah, I told you my stories about being scared out of the woods with his family. The woods got real quiet. He acted like there were some creatures coming into the woods, and him and his wife and their kids left. And then he told me he spotted a creature sitting in a rock canyon near Cliff, New Mexico, sort of swaying back and forth as he drove by in his truck. So he told me, he says, never go camping alone. So this guy was like sort of recounting his experience with Bigfoot, and I always thought, oh, that's up there in Oregon or Canada. It's not down here. That was my sort of conclusion, which you hear hundreds of eyewitnesses, you yourself interview, attest to that.
Right. Actually, there's quite a bit in New Mexico.
Yeah, and I didn't know the activity, and then of course my Native American friends made matters worse by telling me, hey, maybe you had a skinwalker experience. And that was a whole new area, and I was like, what are those? And so then when I moved back to Illinois, I continued my tradition of camping, fish camping. I went out with a recent friend of mine. He was part Native American from this area, from Peoria, and he was always interested in the topic, but I never talked to him because of the ridicule of my Sasquatch experience until probably a year or two before he died, and it was so for 30-plus years I was sort of my secret that only maybe my wife knew, and eventually I told my son, and so as a result I thought, I'm not out here to convince anybody, so I basically started my own YouTube channel, and I go out on my own investigations and I film evidence, but it's probably the result of listening to Rover Krantz, reading Ivan T. Sanderson material, your stuff out in the field I was well familiar with long before you were in Chronicles, but if I'm allowed to say that name.
Yeah, I don't say it either anymore.
So yeah, that was. I did have. I returned to Illinois back in '81. Got married, and then of course in the '90s into probably as of recently, I've had, just because of my YouTube channel, I've been filming footprints, timestamps for audibles. I'm getting a lot of vocalizations that I'll pick up later in my, if I'm using a good enough audio tape recorder, I can usually pick those up. But I have my own channel, and it was just sort of opened the door for me to say, I'm not here to convince anybody, but I'm going to apply the scientific method, go out in the field, do my own research. And to date, I've been doing that for a couple of years, and I've dragged 3 members of my family into it. And it's sort of like a private joke. They don't ridicule Dad, but they sort of know that, they ask that question, I'm not going to lie to them.
Sure. Have they experienced anything yet?
My son has sort of been with me when we've experienced knocks, but he explains it away as something else. And there was another encounter. I went to a state park just 2015, and it was not far from a BFRO sighting, probably within 3/4 of a mile. And I'm leaving this park, the only one there, including the park employees, the state park, and it's, I want to say February going into March, and it was just starting to warm up to 30 degrees outside. It's still cold, and I hear one knock answered by 2 knocks as I was leaving, and it has 2 small parking lots, and there was nobody else in this the state park, and the employees' parking lot was empty, and I'm thinking, it's on a major river. All the green belts are on the major rivers where I have my sound recordings that I picked up, vocalizations. I've heard basically what I call, I don't know if I want to even call it gifting. It's like I'll be taking my back trail out from an area I've walked 4 or 5 miles into, and as I'm leaving, I'll encounter little, like an empty turtle shell. Another day it was a chicken. It was a deer foreleg that had been part of the meat had been eaten off, but most of the meat was on there, and it acted like it was just laid on my my exit trail. There was no other way to exit, so, and I just walked through that area an hour earlier. So I get that kind of activity, vocalizations, you know, and I always try to explain it away with, I guess the scientific method is knowns and material knowns that you know are out there. Well, in Illinois it's limited. We don't have black bear. The occasional, maybe a lot of coyotes, and that's another thing I notice. A lot of coyotes get triggered by these vocalizations, and I've been in 3 different locations in the last year in the state of Illinois where I've encountered this. It's like a provocation call to piss off the coyotes, or something will just call out, and it sounded like a wolf in areas that we don't have any wolves.
Sure.
But that my son witnessed, and then of course I don't go out looking for tree structures in my own personal research. As a result of my own encounters, I look for. When I was in New Mexico, I saw no evidence of tree structures yet. I wasn't looking for it, so I don't know how that pertains to my early encounters, I guess. But that's sort of the sum of, you know, it's sure changed my life. I try not to let it be a obsession or a passion. It's more of it's a hobby that I learn, I guess, I get knowledge from, but at the same time, I'm no more of an expert than anybody else in the field, and as a result, I sort of figure it's a collaboration between guys like you and the people that maybe have been doing this for 40 years, because I don't like to say expert. It's just my pet peeve, I guess.
I don't think anybody's an expert personally. That's my opinion, and but it's good, you know, that you're not making an obsession. I've seen it wreck people's lives over the years, and you know, you have to have a real balance with it, and patience.
Yeah, I mean, knowing the immensity, you know, having my own grandson and going, let's go to a state park, and I don't want to leave him unattended, and you're like, you know, you communicate it in a way to the family where you're just saying, I show concern, but knowing what I know, I know these creatures have the ability to disappear people, and in my area where I look at human contact or civilization is closer on the fringe, so you see these creatures within yards of state and national park trails where you know there's no Boy Scout activity, and I'm sort of like Utah Sasquatch in that field. I was a Cub Scout and an Explorer Scout, you know, and I also was, you know, I was basically in charge of a troop in my local town, and my son was a member, so I took kids camping, and you knew that the danger that was there then, if I would have known it then, I probably wouldn't have just said, you know, hey, yeah, just go camping through you'll go daytime hiking through an unmarked area and don't worry about, you know, surveilling it or taking adults with you. We used to do things like that thinking kids were safe, and I'm thinking, you can, I look at it as an unknown primate living on the fringes of our small towns and rural towns within areas where they have access to. I think there's an interaction going on. I see accumulated places where, like, garbage, bottles and cans are sort of like, I'll walk for miles and see nothing, and it'd be pretty barren, and all of a sudden you'll see just like an area where, like, cans or things were accumulated, and you sort of, what homeless person would walk 5 or 6 miles into a desolate area and then just live there? You know, it's not
right. It don't make a lot of sense.
That's not the profile I'm getting. Yeah, that's not the profile I'm getting, because I'm getting the associated snaps or breaks, which are traditional, but I'm getting the footprints, and I have that in my my video on my YouTube channel if anybody cares to hear it. But it's Illinois Sasquatch at YouTube.
Sure, I'll put the link to your YouTube page with the video or with the audio here.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, you could. Yeah, I'd appreciate that. And like I said, I can send you those timestamp links of my vocalizations on, I think, a video I did 3 or 4 weeks ago, which
yeah, actually, if you'd
I
like,
go into an area that's
It's similar to, like I said, it's a Wisconsin, Missouri type area in west central Illinois, and it's sort of not. It's not indicative of what you would think of Illinois. You would think you were in Missouri. It's not really. People are unaware of it.
Yeah, if you've got any of the audio you'd like to go along with this interview, I'll link them right in with the after we're finished. I'll put them at the end, folks, and you can listen to Don's recordings.
Yeah, I can. I can either email them to you or send them whatever's appropriate.
Sure, just send them to my email, williamjevning@yahoo.com, and I'll link them right to this, and so people get a chance to hear what you're talking about.
Yeah, see, I'm sort of like, I'm your age, but I'm not a new generation researcher. I've just sort of come in at the heels of, you got guys like Colorado and Sasquatch and all the guys, that have been doing this for a long time. And I've been doing it sort of, it was like my silent investigation of truth, I guess you'd call it, because I don't even go public on my own videos. I don't show my face. I want to be more of the anthropologist in the fact that I'm not interacting. The feed's not about me.
Right.
I've had guys in the Bigfoot community later on say, if you could keep your face off of it for like 6 months or longer, you may not invite a lot of trolling and
all the
just
kooks
negative,
out there.
all the kooks, yeah. And so I haven't, I'm just on so far. I haven't, even my videos, I don't have the last name. I just say it's me, and I'm associated with this channel, and I'm sure people understand.
And I'm kind of the same way even. I mean, the only reason I came out in the public was after publishing my first book, basically to get attention. Because, you don't write a book for it not to get attention, so. But I don't
I appreciate the endorsement because I look at the people that were the forerunners, not just you and John Green and Renee DeHinden, but I look at the people that were the forerunners of finding Bigfoot, which to me isn't, as they refer to, not finding Bigfoot, but
right.
But I'm more in the camp of people like basically Autumn Williams, who basically took a lot of heat long before, back when I was thinking about, should I go for a hike by myself and take a camera, and do I want to risk not going out in the same type of environment without a gun?
Yeah, it's how
and
much
she was doing it with a camera crew. Yeah, she was doing it with a camera crew, but I mean, I still think they were more stealthy than how they have a team of 10 people going in now and a sound guy. And I'm just thinking, I go out by myself, Will, and I self-fund my YouTube channel. I'm not into the Patreon yet because I don't want my subscribers to feel they're indebted to me, that my lifestyle is more important than theirs.
And I think it's more important to work at getting to the bottom of what's going on. It's like I don't share a lot of the stuff that I have, just for the fact that it's not all about attention. It's about getting to the bottom of what's really going on out there.
Right. And probably copyright would probably be second most important after that. But I'm just kidding.
Right. There's a lot of people like you that I don't mind sharing information with and stuff that I have. And some stuff I'll put in books, but it is more about really, getting to the bottom of what's with this subject instead of all of the junk that goes on out there.
Yeah, and so I mean, I have to put it in the light of moderation.
Exactly.
I figure if you have a show once a week, if I can think of it more than twice a week, I'm not overtaking my family obligations and letting it get in the way of my own daily responsibilities. So I have to sort of attribute it to an area of serious interest, sort of like astronomy or but I believe in the scientific method because that's the only thing we have right now, and even
Absolutely.
That is the question comes in. A question was raised the other day about, well, it's not what Bigfoot are, it's what more are they? And I'm thinking, well, that science might in the future answer that, but right now science can't read a crystal ball. Science can only give you evidential, hardcore, and that's why I think when they say the genome and the genetic makeup and DNA can be known by science, but they still will not approve it and recognize it as a phylum or a kingdom, then you're actually waiting for science to give it approval. And I always personally accepted that there's unknowns out there, and I'm not just talking about Bigfoot. I guess once you get into type 5s and 6s, you're entering whole new areas, and I'm just dealing with what I know right now.
Exactly, and I think a lot of people jump the gun. They want to look at things down the road, when the first step is to basically prove that they're real, and then science will take it beyond that and take care of all those other issues.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not against repetition, or I guess you'd say it's not so much repetition, it's just getting the valued evidence.
Right.
So you have the burden of proof, because I know your JRG groups, they accumulate, castings and photographs and video and audios. And I have a guy that does this in Illinois, and I'm thinking I can go to his data bank of thousands of audios, Stan Courtney from BFRO, and he's more of, I would say, even on the fringe of BFRO. I don't think he really, polishes his membership badge, but
sure.
But I think he definitely gives it. I have a base or archive to compare my vocalizations with, and it's time consuming, and I don't like the I guess you'd call it the laptop work. I'll do it. It's just, to me, it's just a bunch of you got to do it. You got to go through every inch of video, and I try to keep my videos to 30 minutes now, because scrubbing through an hour of video to find
it's a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, I find audios vocalizations better than I do the supposed silhouette or shadow splotches, and I think I'm past that. To me, the definitive truth, it'd probably be HD video, but I look at so much of that we've already have, and they're still debunking it. Or I don't like to use the word debunk, but they're not using true skepticism as a science to debunk it. So to me, it's not relevant.
Right. There's a lot of people that are they're trying to debunk rather than be skeptics.
Yeah, and to me, the skeptics, you have to come up with proof to the contrary, which is true skepticism, which is, the science of actually using the
I love
scientific
skeptics.
method to disprove it.
I love skeptics.
I love skeptics. I don't like debunkers.
Right, I'm the same way. I love skeptics because they have the great questions, and they make us work harder for the right answers.
Yeah, and that's why I did this for myself, Will. I thought, why, I don't, despite what Grover Krantz did in his excerpts, his book, and even Ivan T. Sanderson, and he wrote a book, I believe it was called The Abominable Snowman, or something to that effect. I read that back in the 60s, and then saw Legend of Boggy Creek sometime before, I think, the Gimlin-Patterson film came out. But I was of the opinion, I said, nobody's like stepping forward. We don't have, back then, we didn't have the Jeff Meldrums or the Melva Ketchums to step forward and say, we're going to take all the flack. So the collaborative effort wasn't there. Now there is. So I've come out of the closet, so to speak, as it's not like a private hobby. So when I launched my YouTube channel, I've already got 20 videos, and I don't want, I guess you'd say, the relevance or the importance to be on me as a person.
Sure.
I'm just the voice behind the camera saying, hey, look at this and that, and and it's hard to keep it honest and have integrity, because I think the Bigfoot community is toxic in of itself.
Oh,
I think
absolutely.
you've had that conversation.
It is.
So, yeah, it is. And I've seen you've had to deal with the onslaught of that, so I don't, I'm just like, it's murky waters. I'm going in slow. I'm not going to really, I don't have T-shirts or products.
I think that's a smart
like
approach.
You do. Yeah, I mean, if I look at it, if I want a T-shirt, I'll wear yours in the field, but I don't, like I said, I got a few people in my family that go out with me on my excursions, and they don't want to, whether it's their job or career, they don't want to have the ridicule factor. Visit them because they're being held accountable because I filmed them in one of my videos, so I have to be careful.
Well, listen, Don, we're running a little short on time, so I certainly appreciate the interview and your time. Very interesting stuff. Yeah,
and like again, my channel is Illinois Sasquatch. I just call myself John, and I'm just starting out. I don't want to. I'm just portraying the area and environment here that's contrast to what you might see out west. And contrary to belief, there's not a lot of tree structures per se. It's not
exactly.
This
I'm in
isn't. It's not Colorado. It has different sign, and the sign is. It's like these creatures adjust to the environment. So you don't have stands of aspens and pine trees. This isn't Colorado. So people seem to understand it's sort of a Missouri/Wisconsin type mixture, and that's in of itself a very strange environment to see these creatures interact with the environment, basically.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, very interesting, and thank you again, Don. And
well, I'm glad you had a chance to finally meet Will Jevning and talk to him. It's interesting.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And folks, we'll have whatever you send me, in terms of audio clips, I'll put those right at the end of the interview here so you can listen to what Don's recorded.
Well, thanks, Will. It's been a pleasure, and continue on, and I'll be listening.
And Don, stay in touch, my friend, and I'll help you any way I can.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Any help is needed. Like I said, I'm old, but I'm still learning. It's still a learning man's game.
Absolutely.
And to me, the learning curve is it's going to come to decades. I know only not even a fraction of that. So
I've been doing this 45 years, and I'm still learning too.
Yeah, it brings up more questions than you realize, doesn't it, Will?
It sure does. The more you learn, the more you ask. So,
well, thank you, Will, and see you later.
Good talking, my friend. Thanks, everyone, for joining me this week. Be sure to tune in again next week as we explore another account from a witness of the unknown.